Hello, my name's Dr. Matt Cap from Capitalised Education. Today, let's have a chat about sensory processing difficulties in autism. Whilst every person on the autism spectrum is different, as the saying goes, once you've met one person on the autism spectrum, you've met one person on the autism spectrum. Sensory processing difficulties can be a characteristic of people on the spectrum. For some people on the spectrum, they might be hyposensitive to sensory input. In other words, they're sensory seeking because they don't recognize that sensory input. This can be a challenge in a classroom where a student needs to be supported, or it can have a functional impact where it has a negative impact on the student's access to the learning process, the curriculum, the classroom, or the playground. In a case where there is a functional impact, the classroom teacher could look at the Universal Design for Learning framework, especially Principle 1 around engagement during the planning, teaching, and assessment cycle. For other students on the autism spectrum, they might be hypersensitive to sensory stimulus. In other words, they're sensory avoiding because they're overwhelmed by those sensory inputs. Imagine what a classroom is like when you're overwhelmed by sensory inputs. In this case, a student who is hypersensitive to sensory stimulus, it could be a challenge where they just need to be supported with the process, or it might have a functional impact where it has negatively impacts on the student's access to the learning process, curriculum, classroom, or playground. If hypersensitivity to sensory stimulus has a functional impact, the classroom teacher can look at the Universal Design for Learning framework, especially Principle 1 around engagement, for ways to support the student during the planning, teaching, and assessment cycle. The Universal Design for Learning checkpoints have been designed in 3 layers. The first layer is access, ways of supporting the student to access the learning process. In these checkpoints, one of the checkpoints is minimize threats and distractions. It gives teachers ideas to overcome hypersensitivity to sensory stimulus during the planning, teaching, and assessment cycle. The next layer of Universal Design for Learning checkpoints is build, to build on the student's access to the learning process. These checkpoints help students build strategies to overcome this hypersensitivity. The last layer of Universal Design for Learning checkpoints are internalized. Those checkpoints help teachers build strategies for the student to help them internalize ways of overcoming the hypersensitivity to sensory stimulus. Every time the teacher looks at the Universal Design for Learning framework during the planning, teaching, and assessment cycle to support a student who has a functional impact with hypersensitivity or hyposensitivity to sensory stimulus, they need to think, what am I doing developing independence in my student? Because it's really important that students on the autism spectrum develop internal strategies to support independence in relation to their functional impacts.